Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, also known by some as Ego Man. Due to my intense focus on ego and how it's impacting our lives, both humanly and spiritually, I want to thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid on OMTimes Radio. I hope you've had a great week as you go about meeting the many important challenges that we all face, which during today's show will have us looking at how lower ego flexibility contributes to difficulty in resolving conflicts, arguments, or disagreements in a healthy manner. The kinds of conflicts, arguments, and disagreements that take place in daily life involving friends and family, acquaintances and strangers, co-workers and employers. Conflicts involving significant or important matters, as well as those involving small, petty, or insignificant things. In fact, the more frequently these latter types of fights and arguments occur, the more reflective they are of ego energy issues. Unfortunately, the conflicts taking place are often poorly resolved or never resolved for those with unhealthy ego energy, creating lots of distance and destructiveness in many of the closest relationships people experience, and blocking the opportunity for people to move on and experience the better things that can happen in the relationship. This is why I consider it to be one of the important life areas, that is, the ability to effectively resolve conflict, particularly with loved ones. So much healthy living is missed or lost when conflicts are poorly or never resolved, never over, or done with. And we're seeing this difficulty playing out on a societal level in the polarity in this country and tribalism, which is reflective of a collective ego stupidity, even though those participating in it are smart, spiritual, and mentally stable people. Today I'll be looking at this difficulty in resolving conflict, as I will in other programs that are focused specifically on a particular imbalanced ego energy and its impact on resolving conflict, which again will focus today on lower ego flexibility, on the poor resolution of conflict. But before I go more deeply into that focus, I want to mention that It's Your Ego, Stupid is a program for spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people, just like you and me, who may at times be led by our ego into something I call ego stupidity, a lesser version of ourselves, and often a lesser version of life. Ego stupidity rooted in ego energy, affecting relationships with our family, friends, and co-workers, even ourselves, which could stand some improvement, maybe a lot of improvement. Ego stupidity rooted in ego energy, impacting our efforts to achieve, to use our potential, to recognize the service in what we are doing, and being able to experience a sense of purpose and meaning connected to our life's work. Ego stupidity affecting our ability to deal effectively with all of the changes, adversity, stressors, and conflicts taking place in our life, often leading to their managing us rather than our managing them. Ego stupidity making it difficult to grow our mind with truth, while keeping us stuck in faulty beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices, with many acquired nowadays from unfiltered social media, fake news on the internet, and opinion news on TV, masquerading as truth, and often suggesting that truth doesn't matter anymore, leading many to avoid inconvenient truths, truths we need to hear even though we may not want to hear them. Ego stupidity making it difficult to feel genuine, lasting happiness, while often leading us into unnecessary anxiety, anger, guilt, sadness, or fake happiness being substituted for the real thing. And finally, ego stupidity impacting our spiritual wellness and ability to be the love, life, and energy God is in our daily thoughts, words, and deeds. In short, impacting our ability to be our divinity in our daily life. As you can see, there are lots of important places that ego stupidity can make its appearance in our lives, the source of which is the nature of our ego energy. If things aren't going as well as you'd like in any of these areas, you've come to the right place, because a lot of what's going wrong has nothing to do with our intelligence or the absence of spirituality or the presence of mental instability, and has a lot more to do with our ego energy serving as the fuel for ego stupidity. Your lives, relationships, and experiences have taught me all of that over the past 40 years, and what I'm sharing with you in my website, my books, and my shows about ego energy and ego stupidity, and how we can heal it with ego medicine when and where needed. Again, thank you for tuning in to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. During today's show, we'll be looking at the impact that lower ego flexibility has on the way a person deals with conflict, and how being consumed with being the owner of the truth often leads to the destructive resolution or ending of conflicts, often occurring in the form of fights, arguments, or disagreements. As a quick reminder, people with lower ego flexibility have rigid and inflexible thoughts, beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices. They have difficulty realizing that people can have different and valid ways of looking at things. Ways of looking at things that were shaped by their past history of relationships, experiences, and events that contributed to often different ways of looking at issues that can be the focus of fights, arguments, or disagreements. The lower ego flexibility person often has an intolerant view of differentness and tends to view it as deficient. They tend to view truth as absolute, as all right or all wrong, all black or all white, all good or all bad, often missing the gray areas in which much of life is taking place, rather than understanding human truth as a relative entity that has been shaped by a person's past. Their approach when in conflict is to assume others are wrong, and that their task is to convince them they are wrong. They want to convert people into their way of looking at things, rather than really listening to them during the conflict. The notion that they can be wrong is inconceivable, as this would violate their belief that they are in ownership of the truth. The low ego flexibility person has a very difficult time realizing that just because you think something doesn't make it true. They have a difficult time recognizing the difference between their beliefs and truth. To them, they are one and the same. And this causes them to miss some of the details behind what they are thinking, what they are believing, and what they are insisting upon as truth, which they bring into conversations that can often turn into fights, arguments, and disagreements. They are often very difficult to be in a relationship with because they have difficulty accepting the thought differences of their partner. They need their partner or a partner who thinks like them. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Well, there are millions of people who experience these very difficulties because there are billions of people on the planet, and every one of them has an ego, just like you and me. Some of these people are living in roles such as the authoritarian, the political extremist, and the religious extremist that I talk about in my book, The Two Voices Within. I want you to take a look to see if you or a loved one is experiencing any of the symptoms, ego stupidity, and ego impact on spiritual wellness I'll be talking about today. I want you to diagnose you because you're the only one living you 24/7. Now we're going to take a look at some of the symptoms which indicate if a lower ego flexibility voice, meaning the mixture of your ego energy and your mind, is talking to and through you in your life when confronted with conflict. And here's the first symptom. You find the idea that people can have different, equally valid views in an argument or disagreement difficult to accept. The person with lower ego flexibility has a hard time realizing that people's ideas and beliefs can be equally valid. People with lower ego flexibility often have a narrow and overly simplistic take on issues. And this gets back to what I said earlier about thinking in all black and all white terms, all right or all wrong. Those are the kinds of mindset that people with lower ego flexibility are working with when they're dealing with issues involving conflict. Here are some questions that can help you to tune into this symptom to see if it's applying to yourself or maybe somebody you love. Do you have a difficult time seeing things from someone else's vantage point? This ability to step out of your own frame of reference, your own mind, and to step into somebody else's shoes, so to speak, to walk in their shoes. People with lower ego flexibility have a very difficult time allowing themselves or being able to do that. Another question. Do you think there is only one right way of looking at things? Again, this approach to conflict, issues, disagreements that insists on the idea that there is really only one absolute truth, one way of knowing or understanding. And what we're talking about is what I call human truth, the things that we may disagree with on in our daily lives that may take place. Is it difficult or impossible for someone to change your mind? People with lower ego flexibility have a very difficult time changing their mind or allowing someone else to change their mind. You might have heard the term stubborn or pig-headed. This is, I think, a reflection of people that we may encounter who are experiencing lower ego flexibility. Even when people are showing them truth that has been validated, that has been supported, has been confirmed by other sources, and they're not just a matter of opinion, the lower ego flexibility person cannot allow themselves to accept another person changing their mind. And that gets back to this ownership of the truth, which is a very prominent part of this type of ego energy. When you think of these particular questions and the symptoms, does that sound familiar to you? I'm going to go on to the next symptom. You feel disagreements can only be successfully resolved. when people agree with you and end up thinking like you. For the lower ego flexibility person, the successful resolution of a conflict has something to do with people coming around to their way of thinking about things and agreeing with them. And unless that happens, from their frame of reference, things are unresolved. So people with lower ego flexibility think that the only way that these disagreements can be resolved is when people come around to their way of looking at things, seeing things their way. Here are some questions for you to consider in regards to that symptom. Do you think agreeing to disagree is wrong or silly or even stupid? People with lower ego flexibility, this notion of a healthy ability to agree to disagree, they find it very difficult to accept that because, again, they're in their way of looking at things, they own the truth. So if I'm agreeing to disagree, I'm accepting, in a way, somebody else's version of truth. And I can't accept that because that's not truth. I have the truth, and they have to come to know it. That is the thinking of the lower ego flexibility person. Another question, is the idea coming around to way others think about issues unthinkable, meaning allowing you to take in and change your mind, to buy into maybe what somebody else is sharing with you? Is that something that in some ways is just unthinkable? The whole goal of a conversation or a conflict is to get them to think like me, not for me to think like them, which is the world and experience of the lower ego flexibility person. And also, is the main and only goal of the conflict to get others to agree with you? So the lower ego flexibility person isn't learning anything or seeking to grow from or being exposed to something that they do not know. Their objective is simply to get others to agree with them. When you think of these questions and the symptoms, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're going to look at one more symptom before we take our first break. You have an extremely difficult time admitting you are wrong in a disagreement. People with lower ego flexibility have a very difficult time admitting they are wrong within a disagreement. They don't like to admit to themselves and others where they are or could be wrong. So give some thought to that whole ability, that notion of acknowledging that one has been wrong and how well that fits or doesn't fit with who you are. People with lower ego flexibility have a difficult time with that. Some questions connected to that symptom. Do you equate being wrong with being stupid or ignorant? Do you equate being wrong with being stupid or ignorant? Unfortunately, people with lower ego flexibility see being wrong as being stupid. And so that's perhaps is partly why they have a difficult time allowing themselves to admit that they are wrong to others or to themselves, because that becomes equated with stupidity. Now, it may be ignorance to not know something, to be wrong, because I was not, I didn't have all the information I needed to have in regards to the position I was assuming. But it doesn't make you stupid to not know something. Also, do you think people are going to look down on you for being wrong? People with lower ego flexibility have a difficult time because they think others are going to look down on themselves, on them for being wrong. And also, did people in your past attack you for being wrong? Meaning, in your family, did people attack you if you would, insult you for having been wrong? So, in a way, you learned in your family, if it did happen that way, that being wrong was not okay. It was not acceptable to be wrong, and that was downloaded into your mind. When you think of these particular symptoms and questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're coming up on our first break. When we return, we'll be looking at some reflections of ego stupidity connected to lower ego flexibility while one is dealing with conflict. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. And I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the Internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at reflections of ego stupidity and when it's happening in a lower ego flexibility person's difficulties in resolving conflict. Some of these may seem strange or weird, wrong, funny, or inappropriate, but that's because you're not living in that ego energy. But for those with lower ego flexibility, it's leading them to engage in ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, affecting their ability to resolve conflict due to their lower level of ego flexibility. It often leads them to conclude that the abnormal things they're thinking or feeling or doing are normal when confronted with conflict. And like the symptoms, they can become their abnormal normal that they don't realize they're caught up in. But others often can, because they're not looking at them through the same ego energy prism or lens or filter that the lower flexibility person is looking through to see what's taking place in dealing with the arguments, disagreements, and fights going on in their life. And they're intelligent, spiritual, imperfect, and mentally stable people. But they've gotten caught up in the web of an abnormal world of their own making due to their unhealthy, lower ego flexibility energy. And they can remain stuck there until they heal the energy, leading them to the symptoms and ego stupidity taking place. They can do this with the use of ego medicine, consisting firstly of coming to understand what ego is and isn't. Coming to understand that ego is an energy at work in their life, as it is in all of our lives, and its purpose is to promote our survival. But unfortunately, when the energy is imbalanced, it often leads to some very distorted ways of approaching different aspects of life, which include dealing with conflict. And also learning about what ego isn't. Something I talk about in one of my previous programs, myths, including the notion that your ego has an intellect, that it has an ability to think and form thoughts, which it doesn't. Now, your ego has no intellect, it doesn't have a brain, it's just an energy. You're the person doing the thought forming based upon the ego energy flowing into your mind. And also coming to understand that your ego does not have an intentional quality, meaning it's not out to impact your life directly in any specific way. It doesn't have an intellect upon which to form an awareness of you or itself or God, and ultimately to create intentions that it passes along to you. I say this because often writers dealing with ego often suggest that ego does think, and it does have an awareness of you and itself and God, and it also has the ability to form intentions, none of which are true. The next contributor to ego medicine is being able to tune into our ego energy, coming to an awareness of the amount of ego power, ego flexibility, and ego energy that are at work in our ego energy. And this is something that you must be assisted with because this is completely new territory for everyone. This means taking a look at the books I've written on this topic, also looking at the podcasts that are available on my website, as well as being able to take a look at the material I have on my website, egoandspirit.info, to help you in this process. And then the third ingredient to ego medicine is replacing ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts and beliefs that we created with those that are connected to truth and reality, both human and divine. And that is what the next part of today's show is going to deal specifically with. This third contributor to ego medicine involves looking at reflections of ego stupidity for the disconnection from reality. The kinds of inaccurate, illogical, or irrational thoughts that people with lower ego flexibility often bring into their efforts to manage conflict, to resolve conflict. And here is the first one. When people think differently from me, they're ignorant and stupid. When people think differently from me, they're ignorant and stupid. This is a non-reality based thought, because oftentimes many people think differently and they're quite intelligent and they may have a lot of information that we lack. So the notion that when people think differently, they're ignorant or stupid is a non-reality based thought. It's a reflection of ego stupidity. In a way, people with lower ego flexibility have a need to think they own the truth. That's something I shared with you earlier in this program. This need to feel like they own the truth. And within that ownership is to develop almost negative attitudes toward other people's thoughts. And this is ego stupidity that can feed into additional ego stupidity that also begins to happen, including when people think differently. Their thoughts, beliefs, values, attitudes are deficient. The person with lower ego flexibility equates differentness with deficiency. That is a very prominent part of that energy, thinking that when people have different thoughts and beliefs and attitudes and values, that they're necessarily deficient. And that's a non-reality based truth-disconnected thought reflective of ego stupidity, being thought by an intelligent, spiritually based, and non-mentally ill person. They're still thinking that. Also, there's the lower ego flexibility person may also be thinking there's only one way to think about things intelligently, my way. Again, this whole idea of thinking and what intelligence means, and thinking that it's directly linked to what I'm thinking. And one more thought, non-reality based, reflective of ego stupidity. People who are different from me, being it ethnically, racially, religiously, sexually, politically, are deficient. People with lower ego flexibility, unfortunately, often come at people who are different, not only in thought, but also in maybe their appearance and their culture and other things I mentioned as being deficient. That is the basis for why we see a lot of prejudice coming through for people with lower ego flexibility, because they're caught up in that energy, and it drives, unfortunately, stereotypes which are often half-truths about people. When your lower ego flexibility is healing, you begin to realize that thinking differently including that from people with different backgrounds, can be quite intelligent and informed. So different thinking, again, from people from different backgrounds can actually be quite informed. But until then, when you're thinking that when people think differently from you, they're ignorant and stupid, well, that's and all the rest of what I've just shared with you, well, that's your ego making you stupid, your ego energy making you stupid. Another reflection of ego stupidity. Everyone can and should see things the way I do. Everybody can and should see things the way I do. People with lower ego flexibility are often so enamored with their delusional ownership of the truth that they believe this must happen. Again, a non-reality based thought that intelligent, spiritual, and non-mentally ill people think that everybody can and should see things the way I do. This is ego stupidity that can often feed into additional ego stupidity that also begins to happen, and that is that things can't be okay unless we see them the same way, my way. Again, a non-reality based thought that people with lower ego flexibility get caught up in, that the healthiness, goodness, being okay has something to do with everybody coming around the way I see things. Another non-reality based thought that differences in background shouldn't affect the ability to come to a common agreement or understanding. What this is getting at is this idea that we can dismiss the people's differences in their backgrounds and experiences, their culture, as they should still begin to see things my way, even if they are from different places and different times and experiences. That shouldn't matter. They should still think the way I do. That's a non-reality based thought. And also, there is an absolute human truth that exists, meaning that people should be able to think about everything in human terms the same way. And this ignores the relativity of human experiences, that we all, again, have these unique and different distinctive backgrounds that shape the person we are and affect the way we think and value and so on. When your lower ego flexibility is healing, you begin to realize that everyone's experiences can affect what they can and will see, and that there's not a need to remove these differences. But until then, when you're thinking that everybody can and should see things the way I do and all the rest, that's your ego making you stupid. I'm going to share one more reflection with you before we talk about insights. I can't learn anything from others in a disagreement. People with lower ego flexibility put up mental walls in order to maintain or reinforce the illusion of owning the truth. So they thought, I can't learn anything from others in a disagreement. And this is ego stupidity that feeds into additional ego stupidity also beginning to happen, including that learning means exposing myself to deficiency. Boy, what a radical idea, that the idea that thinking or learning means exposing myself to deficiency. But that is the mental framework of the person with lower ego flexibility. Also, that it's bad to admit that you don't know something to others. This kind of gets back to that notion of equating not knowing something with stupidity, and that it's a bad thing. And it's difficult because of this need to own the truth. And also that it's bad to admit that you don't know something to yourself. Not only is it difficult for the lower ego flexibility person to admit not knowing something to others, it's hard for them to admit knowing something to themselves, which is a non-reality based thought, because it can be a very healthy thing to be able to do that. When your lower ego flexibility is beginning to heal, you realize learning from others in a disagreement can be healthy and bring you closer to truth that you didn't know, but you needed to know. Until then, when you're thinking that I can't learn anything from others in a disagreement, and all of the rest I've shared with you, that's your ego making you stupid. Now I want to share some specific insights connected to the symptoms of ego stupidity I've been talking about. These are insights that can help you to better see what's going on behind the scenes and beneath the surface. We'll start with the first one. Your lower ego flexibility voice, that combination of your ego energy and mind, is leading you to look down on others' ideas and beliefs as a means to further validating your own. It's like the more I can look down on theirs, the more truthful that mine are. And it's leading you to look for what's wrong in other people's positions and overlooking or avoiding what's right. So it's pushing you towards finding what's wrong with what they're saying and overlooking and ignoring what's right, which is unhealthy. It's leading you to miss the ignorance that is often taking place in yourself, meaning the lack of information, the lack of knowledge that you need in order to have a more informed truth, instead of getting by on a lot of mistruths and half-truths that are often the place for those with lower ego flexibility. And it's also leading you to create greater distance from truth. Lower ego flexibility is pushing you further from truth, not closer to truth. But when you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. Our next insight, your lower ego flexibility voice, the mixing of your energy, your ego energy and your mind, is leading you to filter your notions of what is valid through an egocentric view of different backgrounds that is biased toward your own. An egocentric view, meaning in a way my background is more significant, more important than those of others. And this is leading you to disqualify people from knowing the truth based upon their background. You know, when I think about this, I'm thinking about the early colonialism and how it often assumed that indigenous populations needed to be taught something better or different than they already knew. And this was in a way disqualifying them from knowing the truth based upon their background. A lot of low ego flexibility connected to that kind of approach to dealing with foreign or different people than they were familiar with. And it's preventing you from expanding the boundaries of your mind through healthy encounters with differentness. Lower ego flexibility. It's preventing you from expanding the boundaries of your mind through healthy encounters with differentness. And it's leading you to think that only people who can know truth, who are people like you. Overdoing this whole notion is almost a very egocentric, ethnocentric view that only the people who are like me in thought and appearance can know the truth. When you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. I'm going to talk about one more insight before we go to our second break. Your lower ego flexibility voice, the blending of your ego energy and mind, is leading you to believe that there can only be one absolute version of reality that people can agree on. One absolute version of human reality that people can agree on. So that's distancing you from an awareness of the relativity of human truth. That relativity built upon different experiences that people have undergone that have shaped and formed who they are. It's distancing you from an awareness of the diversity of human ideas and beliefs. This whole notion of diversity, I think this is something that many people with lower ego flexibility have had one heck of a time getting their mind around, this notion of cultural diversity and respecting the differences of thoughts and beliefs and experiences and treating them as though they are equally valid, which they are. And it's contributing to a willingness to discriminate against those who don't share your thoughts and beliefs. Again, ego flexibility, lower ego flexibility, it almost becomes, because I own the truth and know the truth and they don't, it's okay for me to discriminate against them for not knowing the truth that I know. When you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. We're coming up on our second break. When we return, we'll be looking at ego's impact on our spiritual wellness. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at how lower ego flexibility can impact our spiritual wellness when it comes to coping with and resolving conflict. We're going to be looking at ego's impact on the connection, which is actually a disconnection between our humanity and our divinity. The disconnection from the God within our being, which is one of the 4 divine gifts that we've all been given. The gift of God within, that makes it possible for all of us to exist, to live. The lessening of our spiritual wellness involves gaining distance from being the love, the life, and the energy God is, within our thoughts, words, and deeds, when ego is getting in the way of resolving the conflicts taking place in our life. Each of these can be undermining our spiritual wellness by distancing us from God, the God within us, our divinity. Here are some examples of ego's impact on spiritual wellness for those with lower ego flexibility who are failing to be their divinity when being involved in conflict. We'll start with ego's impact on being the love God is when dealing with conflict. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty being spiritually well when rigidity and inflexibility weakens their efforts to manage and resolve conflicts with unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited love. Your divinity involves lovingly managing and resolving life's fights, arguments, and disagreements within healthy flexibility that is respectful of all, including oneself. When your lower ego flexibility and inflexibility prevents you from lovingly resolving all of the conflicts that life will bring forth, you're not able to be the unconditional love God is. We must bring unconditional love that invites openness and acceptance within the arguments and the disagreements that occur with our family, our friends, our neighbors, so that we can live in peace with each of them. When your lower ego flexibility and inflexibility weakens meeting life's conflicts with love, rather than with anger, frustration, or distance, you're not able to be the connective love God is. We must lovingly work with those with whom we are in conflict, so that we can learn and grow from each other within the opportunities that healthy conflict provides for this to happen, when it is supported by love. When your lower flexibility and inflexibility are burdening you with anger and frustration, rather than love, in working with life's inevitable conflicts, you're not able to be the unburdened love God is. We must bring love into our conflicts so that they can be resolved with growth, peace, and love, rather than unresolved with avoidance, anger, and distance from others. When your lower ego flexibility and inflexibility are limiting the amount of love you can bring to working to understand and manage conflicts, you're not able to be the unlimited love God is. The participation in conflict with unlimited love will open the door to learning what must be learned by each participant and resolving them with growth, peace, and love, rather than unresolved with anger, frustration, and distance from others. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. Next, we'll talk a little bit about ego's impact on being the life God is when dealing with life's conflicts. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty being spiritually well when failure to recognize their rigidity is leading them to dishonor and disrespect others when engaging in conflict with them. Your divinity involves recognizing, honoring, and respecting others while in conflict with them so that you can work with and resolve the arguments and the disagreements taking place. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity are leading you to dishonor and disrespect others, when disrespectfully attacking, challenging, and dismissing their thoughts and beliefs, you're not being the life God is. The removal of your inflexibility and rigidity will allow you to honor and respect other ideas and opinions, despite how much they may differ from your own. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity are leading you to dishonor and disrespect the backgrounds and experiences of others while in conflict, you're not being the life God is. The removal of your inflexibility will allow you to honor and respect people from all backgrounds, even as you engage in conflict with them. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity are leading you to honor or to dishonor and disrespect others with faulty notions of owning the truth, you're not being the life God is. The removal of your inflexibility will allow you to honor and respect the breadth of human truth that can exist, built upon the diversity of human experiences and backgrounds. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity, in which any conflict can be resolved in peace and love. Last, we're going to take a look at being the energy God is and ego's impact on it when dealing with the conflicts, disagreements, and arguments that life will bring. This involves being able to access healing and transformative energy designed into your being to naturally occur when you're connected to human and divine truth. This is a capacity that's 3 million years in the making, just as all of the other wondrous things that we have been endowed with due to the wisdom of the ages and evolution. This is a capacity rooted in our common source, be it known by you as God, Allah, Yahweh, Vishnu, Great Spirit, Source, or another I have failed to mention. People with lower ego flexibility and rigidity have difficulty being spiritually well when failing to resolve conflicts within the light of truth and understanding that can be found when they are not being blinded by the inflexibility that exists within them. Our divinity involves healing and transformation in which we are willing to work with and manage life's conflicts by seeking the truth and understanding that can be found within us and others when it is not being obscured by consumption with one's sense of perceived ownership of the truth. It involves healing and transformation in which we are taking responsibility for seeking truth and understanding when in conflict that is unencumbered by the distortion that inflexibility often brings to dealing with conflicts in the light of truth. When lower ego flexibility and rigidity is keeping you at a distance from knowing truth and understanding about all of the facts at work within conflicts, you're not being the energy God is in working with them. The removal of your inflexibility will open the door to deeper truth and understanding in which you can learn more about what you do know and acknowledge the need to learn it. When lower ego flexibility and rigidity is keeping you from learning truth and understanding that you can get from others, you're not being the energy God is. The removal of your inflexibility will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of the wisdom others can offer to you within conflict. When lower ego flexibility and rigidity is keeping you from knowing truth and understanding about the destructive impact your approach to conflict is having on yourself as well as others, you're not being the energy God is. The removal of your inflexibility will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of the ways you have harmed yourself and others with failure to believe in them when confronted with the inevitable conflicts life will bring. When ego is getting in the way, and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. As we leave our focus on ego's impact on our spiritual wellness, please know that we often make God and our connection to God and others so much harder than it has to be. This is what happens when unhealthy ego energy is getting in between us. God and life and we become so much better and so much easier when we remove that obstacle with ego medicine. As we leave our focus on lower ego flexibility and difficulty working with life's conflicts, give some thought to the symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact I've shared with you. I hope that what I've shared with you today will serve as a dose of ego medicine. And if any of it resonates with you, please help me to share it with others. I want to mention before leaving that you can purchase each of my books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, The Two Voices Within, and It's Your Ego Stupid, at the online bookstores for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. You can also purchase Focused Ego Meditations on the shop page of my website, egoandspirit.info, which can help you to know when you are truly speaking with your voice in your life and not ego's, as you go about healing your ego energy where needed in its power, flexibility, or vulnerability. I end today's show with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and shine through you and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts. The spiritual part of healing is a given. It's part of your endowment. Divine truth and the divine gifts are part of your heritage that already exists within you. You need do nothing more to be spiritual, because you already are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You only need to enhance your humanity with ego medicine, so that all which is available to you is given. Fix your ego to fix your life, humanly and spiritually. I want to thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. Please have a great week, and do come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.